So it's been a while since I've done one of these, but it's a comparison that I've been waiting to make for more than 20 years, which is about how long I've loved Rurouni Kenshin, one of my favorite anime of all time, from its original 1996 TV debut to its most recent 2023 remake, and everything in between, especially the live action movies, which I love. Like I mentioned in my Buzz Mod Kenshin review, I've always wanted an official 1/12 fully articulated Kenshin figure, and after more than 2 decades, we finally have 2 official offerings from 2 separate companies. We have Buzzmod with its early entry into the new Rurouni Kenshin anime series, mixing conventional plastic and cloth goods for a best of both worlds combination. And in the other corner, it's S.H.Figuarts with a more traditional approach, boasting even greater articulation than its rival. Which figure will come out on top? Well, I'll leave that one up to you, but let's jump into what each company has to offer. First up, the price tag on both of these releases, which, more often than not, whether we like to admit it, can very well be the deciding factor on whether we decide to make the purchase. These are the prices listed on each respective company's websites, with Buzzmod coming in at 9,900 yen or roughly 62 US dollars, compared to S.H.Figuarts' lower price tag of 75,000 yen or 47 US dollars. But I guess that doesn't really mean anything since we need listings from actual retailers. So let's pop on over to Big Bad Toy Store, today's sponsor for this video. Just joking, still waiting for that day to happen. Jokes aside, Big Bad Toy Store has Buzzmod listed at 99 US dollars and SHF at 64.99, which sounds about right because that's kind of how it feels like here in Japan if you go equal dollar to yen. Anyway, that's a $25 difference, and for some, more than they'd like to pay, which is definitely fair game. Both Kenshins are regular releases, but with Tamashi's larger distribution in the US and other countries, the S.H.Figuarts is going to be a lot easier to get your hands on. Not to say that Buzzmod was necessarily difficult, but from my experience, there were a lot less places that stocked Buzzmod than Figuarts. I had to pre-order directly from Aniplex because good old Army unfortunately weren't selling him. So if price and availability are important to you, Figuarts definitely takes the win for this category. So the first thing you'll notice is the size. Yes, Buzzmod is bigger than the Figuarts, with the head looking significantly larger, but both figures are meant to be 1/12 scale. This is my first Buzzmod figure, so I'm not too familiar with how they scale in comparison to other 6-inch lines, but I have heard they are usually a bit bigger than SHF, with SHF being more on the true 1/12 scale side. Either way, the most important thing is how well they scale with their respective lines. So if you do plan to mix and match between Buzzmod and Figuarts, it might not work as well. When you have both side to side, the head on Buzzmod does look pretty big in comparison, but it's only when you have them together. When I first got the Buzzmod in hand, I thought it looked fine. The head gave the figure more of an anime feel, and the body is slightly larger than the Figuarts. Alright, next up, the head sculpts. Alright, so first up, the head sculpts. This is probably the most important area in terms of sculpt work for this particular figure. When you think of Kenshin, what immediately comes to mind? Cross-shaped scar, feminine facial features, red poofy hair, sakabato, pink kimono, short and slender. And half of what I mentioned has to do with Kenshin's iconic face design. His look is so synonymous to his character, whereas you might have a little bit more leeway with his outfit and sword. You have to absolutely nail the face to get Kenshin right. And this is actually a lot harder than I thought, because personally, I think both Buzzmod and Tamashi did a phenomenal job with capturing Kenshin's look. We get 4 options from Buzzmod and 5 options from Tamashi, each capturing key expressions from the anime and manga. The first comparison is arguably Kenshin's most iconic expression, the big, bright-eyed, innocent smile. This is who Kenshin really is, the kind-hearted boy who never really had the chance to grow up. And I think both Buzzmod and Tamashi knocked it right out of the park with the eyes. The cross-shaped scar is sculpted on both and nicely printed. The hair with both head sculpts have the right amount of volume and sculpted strands. Like I said, it's got that nice poofiness that's iconic for his look in the manga and anime. But the difference between the two sculpts sculpts comes in the ponytail. Figuarts has a more relaxed, neutral sculpt with the strands of hair bunched together, and Buzzmod giving us a bit more flow, a bit more movement for poses with a bit more action. The other options we get are pretty similar with both companies. We have a stern, cold stare, and an angry shout from Buzzmod, and a teeth grit from Tamashii. And both companies have also given us Kenshin's signature auto face as well. But Figuarts ones up Buzzmod with an extra smiling option, eyes closed expression we often see Kenshin with when he's around his friends. I think what we get with Buzzmod is more than enough since it covers almost all bases with Kenshin's expressions, but more options are always welcome, especially if you're into toy photography. Now here comes the tough part, and what I think will probably pull you towards or away from one or the other. So let's start off with the top half. Both figures are sculpted beautifully. I think both Tamashii and Buzzmod did a fantastic job in capturing Kenshin's short but slender frame. The sculpted kimono is well done. There's enough detail in the sculpted material to keep it interesting, but it doesn't overdo it either to compensate for a simple design. Figuarts has an extra cut on the shoulders to hide the butterfly joints, and they've also given Kenshin an individual bicep swivel for better arm movement, which does make it easier for your sword wielding poses. Buzzmod, on the other hand, is a little bit more simple, opting to go with an internal swivel at the shoulders, which are more exposed, but we also get a bit of movement at the elbow joint as well. Less cuts on the arm, but more exposed joints at the shoulders and elbows. Buzzmod does, however, have a break in the torso as opposed to the solid torso of the Figuarts, where the kimono is a rubber overlay, very similar to Beast Gohan. Figuarts does look cleaner and surprisingly gets better range as well. Now, the lower half is a completely different story. Like I mentioned in my Buzzmod review, I love the cloth goods Hakama pants. I know some might have preferred full cloth goods for Kenshin, top and bottom, but I think this combination works well, and the material lower half is integrated relatively seamlessly to the top plastic half. However, when it comes to low or wide stance poses, the pants completely cover the feet and you lose most of that beautiful silhouette. You can definitely work at it and get it to work in some poses, but because of the scale and weight of the fabric, it won't drape naturally and kind of just floats. Figuarts, unfortunately, isn't much better. Whilst we get better articulation and more stability, the legs just look like blocks. The lines in the Hakama pants are broken up considerably, and if you're a collector who wants their figure to look as smooth as possible, this probably won't be for you. It does, however, function pretty well, making it a lot easier to hit poses, but again, it's not the prettiest to look at, even in a neutral pose. So usually in this section, I would just freestyle it and show you each point of articulation and how well the figure moves, which I will still do, but I think in a comparison like this, I think it might be better to also show off what the figure can actually do in poses that you might have Kenshin perform. So the first pose is one that I like to think of as Kenshin's Spider-Man 4-point crouch. With Kenshin's extensive repertoire of techniques, I think Batojutsu is the one that defines him. It's the foundation of his ultimate technique and a pose that tests pretty much everything a figure needs to pull it off. So the first thing you're going to need for this pose is a really good ab crunch going forward. And while Buzzmod has that mid-torso cut with a pretty good double ball joint system that comes from the waist, it's only slightly above average before things start popping out. Figuarts, on the other hand, uses soft rubbery material with the kimono, kind of like the Figuarts Ryu or Beast Gohan, but the results are pretty impressive. It's a lower crunch that comes from the waist and gets better range than Buzzmod, but still, I think I would have liked a little bit more for a more natural looking Batojutsu pose. The legs are also really important here as they supplement the ab articulation and allows you to get those low stance positions. Here Buzzmod has the advantage of using cloth goods, which really frees up the leg articulation, and while it looks decent, the soft material pants do cover his feet and kind of sweep the floor. Whilst not the most flattering, especially within knee joints, we do get some really good range going forward with the Figuarts. The legs can bend pretty far up and a decent amount going back, but unfortunately, because the way the pants are sculpted, there is very little thigh rotation, which you need to keep the figure balanced. Also, Figuarts Kenshin doesn't get the best side-to-side spread, which means most of the work is done with your legs kicking forward and back. The next pose is your double-handed sword grip pose, which Kenshin uses for his 9-head dragon flash. Both figures hold the sword with both hands pretty naturally, but one thing to keep in mind is that for Buzzmod, because of the straight wrist pegs, it was a little bit more tricky because the hands kept wanting to come out mid-pose. The separate bicep swivels on the Figuarts really helped with this one, which was something that Buzzmod kind of struggled with. So let's take this pose to the next level and have Kenshin performing an overhead jump slash. For both figures, it was pretty hard to get past and over the head, but again, Buzzmod's hands just kept coming out during the pose, and the limited inner bicep swivel was also pretty hard to work around. Figuarts was a lot easier with this pose, and the hands stayed in place throughout the process. The last pose is kind of a run and slide pose, something we see Kenshin do a lot in the anime and live action movies. This is a test of how wide the legs can go if each Kenshin can do the hand on the floor crouch. Buzzmod doesn't have any problems with the legs, but the ab crunch isn't going to give you the best crunch forward. Also, the head and neck won't move up much due to the ponytail getting in the way, so you can't really have Kenshin looking up. Figuarts just doesn't have the range kicking out, so you can't get a low enough crouch for Kenshin to touch the floor. It's got the same issue with the ponytail getting in the way of any upward head movement like the Buzzmod, but I do like what Tamashii have done here with the ankles. It's really similar to the Naruto line, where you have extra movement where the ankles connect to the pants. It's on a ball joint, so the legs around the pants don't hit the floor in lower stances. Alright, so let's start off with the easy stuff first. For hands, Kenshin gets 2 fists. Buzzmod gets a pair of relaxed hands, whereas Figuarts gives us hands that are a little bit more tense, hands that look like they're ready for the draw. We also have a set of open palm action hands from both companies, as well as 2 sets of hands for holding Kenshin's sakabato and sheath. Speaking of sakabato, here are both side by side and both working exactly the same. We get the actual sword itself and the sheath with just the hilt that tabs into the sheath, which gives you several posing options. The Buzzmod, I think, has a little bit more detail, with the handle guard having the 2 openings as it's meant to be, as opposed to the Figuarts where it's just sculpted in. The lengths are also different. Buzzmod is shorter but thicker, and Figuarts is longer but thinner. And it kind of feels like I'm talking about something else, but let us know in the comments, ladies, which do you prefer? Sorry, children, I just couldn't help myself. The biggest difference, however, is how you attach the sword sheaths to Kenshin's belt. With Buzzmod, you just slide in the sword in a pre-sculpted slot in the belt, which looks good when you have Kenshin with the sword, but it leaves a hole when you don't have him carrying it. Figuarts have opted to go with a peg system and given us an extra belt without the peg, just in case you want Kenshin without his sword. One thing to keep in mind though is that the sheath will always have that peg hole in it, as opposed to the clean looking sheath with Buzzmod. I think no matter which figure you decide to go with, you're going to be pretty happy. They're both great releases that really capture Kenshin's look, especially with the heads and faces, from Kenshin's more serious expressions to your more light-hearted, even goofy options. Both Buzzmod and Tamashii have got you covered. I think it really comes down to a couple of things: scale, the legs, and the price. I'm not too sure what Buzzmod plans to do with this line in the future, whether Kenshin is just a one-off or they continue to give us more characters, but one thing is for sure, you're probably not going to be able to mix and match lines. Buzzmod looks just way too big compared to the Figuarts, especially with the heads, so unfortunately the upcoming Figuarts, Saito Hajime and Shinamori Aoshi, won't pair up well with your Buzzmod, and vice versa if Buzzmod does decide to do their own villains. I think the cloth goods Hakama pants are done really well with Buzzmod and look fantastic in more neutral poses, but then again, you might not like the mix of cloth material and traditional plastic. The Figuarts is much more easier to handle and is more of a poser than a displayer. But then you got to ask yourself, how far are you willing to sacrifice aesthetics for articulation? Personally, it's a tough one, and if I had to choose between the two, it could go either way on any given day. The ideal situation would be the top half from Figuarts and the bottom half from Buzzmod. Let's give it a try. So as I thought, the ball joints and sockets at the waist don't fit, but this kind of gives you an idea of what I would have liked personally. I really like the upper half from Tamashii. The arms are so much easier to get your sword wielding poses right, and while the cloth goods pants do kind of overwhelm the legs in more dynamic poses, I really like how it looks on Kenshin in more relaxed poses. So in the end, I don't really have a definitive answer, but if budget is a concern, Figuarts is the way to go. If aesthetics are important for you and you want a nice display piece, I'd go Buzzmod. Again, both figures are great, and I'm just happy we finally have figures and choices for an anime that definitely deserves it. Alright guys, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed the comparison. This is going to be a packed month, so I will be back with a whole lot more. Probably the Super Saiyan Goku accessory pack next, followed by Figuarts Minato, followed by Kyui, and to round things off, Figuarts Ahsoka. But if things fall into place, and I really hope they do, fingers crossed, I may have a surprise archive review slotted in there somewhere. We'll just have to see. Anyway, have a fantastic week, guys. San Diego Comic-Con is coming up, so expect to see some really exciting new reveals over the next week.
よろしく